you are. Marcus, my friend, how are you doing today?
Fine. How about you?
I'm good. This has been a long day. We'll just wait a minute for to let people join us.
Sure.
Yeah, tap dancing on the table is obviously an option, but let's keep things in a little bit
Yeah.
with a bit of dignity.
Yeah. I assume that there may be people from late already. I mean, it's already late in some parts of the planet. So
Yeah, so I don't
I,
know.
I, I, I actually told our colleagues in India, don't feel forced to join because, it's already going to be quite late for you guys. But if you're here, thank you. And anyone from that time zone, obviously, and beyond.
That time zone and beyond, yes. So I suggest we jump into it. So this is the conversation about Crossbow. Welcome, everybody. I'm here with our wonderful CTO, Marcus. Let me start with a little confession. Marcus, how do you feel about webinars?
Well, actually, that would be, I have no experience at all with webinars, but yeah, let's just say that, the format where you just put a text on screen and just roll with it, that's kind of, not always the most interactive or the most pleasant experience, I would say.
So let me start with the confession. I hate webinars. And the very
Well,
idea of
that's
organizing
blunt.
this like a structured webinar and just material pushed to our more or less willing audience, I feel a little bit bad about this. So this is why we designed this in a totally different format. So we are how can I say, this is live, so there's no cheating. None of this is pre-recorded. We will start with 5 slides to just frame the conversation, and then we'll take questions. The questions can be put in the chat. Feel free to try to nail us. I'm very fortunate to have Marcus with us, so Marcus knows everything there is to know about the topic of today. Please feel free to interact. Feel free to interrupt. You don't have to wait for the end of those famous 5 slides to start getting back to us.
Actually, my understanding is that there's this Q&A tab in the meeting that can be used for pushing questions effectively. So there's actually both the chat and the Q&A. I think the idea is to use the Q&A section of it. But yeah, if you want to push it in the chat, that's fine as well.
Oh, sorry.
And as far as I know, the questions aren't anonymous, so we'll know who's asking them.
Mostly among friends, so I mean, I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. But just so you know, just so you're aware of that.
Okay, as they say, we know where you live, right? That's right. So this conversation is about Crossbow. Crossbow is the code name we gave to our latest release, and so if we turn back and look at the history, I mean, we have been providing quite a few products over the last almost 15 years now, starting with PL1 compiler. That's how we got there. And we gradually expanded our product base, and we tried to keep things as consistent as we can across all products. And the idea of Crossbow is say, okay, we used to have 1, 2, 3, and then quite a few of those products. The idea is to go to do a synchronized release, having all products being released in the most consistent way possible. So and we gave it a code name essentially because it does not apply to one product or even to one set of product. The last minor release is already 3 years.
By the way, Darius, just because I know you came up with the name Crossbow. What made you take Crossbow as a name?
So
I think that's an obvious question. In fact, I think the whole staff is asking themselves the same question.
So you think it's me, but I don't get to make those decisions. I just push a number of options to Alex, who runs marketing, and he has the final cut. I wanted something that conveys power, that conveys speed, and that was not too military. So I didn't want something like machine gun. I want something a little bit more, something softer, and that's where Crossbow came from.
Okay,
Also,
I was expecting some kind of pun on retargeting or something, but okay.
yeah, you're putting too much intention in this. I'm afraid you're putting way too much intention. So no, and the name makes for nice visuals, as you could see in the splash screen. So that's really nice. So the last major release is already 6 years old. The last minor release is already 3 years old, and there are quite a few things that can be and that should be and that have been rationalized, including, for instance, things, APIs that have been marked obsolete for years have finally been dropped. Literally thousands of minor, not so minor patches. These products are being maintained very, very actively. There are quite a few things around integration. For instance, we had a big push on integration for telemetry using .NET Aspire. We have improved Oracle integration as well. And I sometimes tell my people, we're not in the business of delivering software. We're in the business of delivering a user documentation. And by the way, a piece of software that implements whatever is being documented. So there has been a gigantic effort on the user documentation. There are many things to say about Crossbow, but tonight we'll focus on 3 aspects, namely platform support, deployment, and performance. And Marcus, you know me, I'm just reading these, so I'm going to let you, take the stand and say whatever there is to say about the 2 first of these topics.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was just thinking about a minor anecdote. It's just that 6 years since the last major release. I think I joined Raincode like 2 months before that release. So yeah, version 4 has effectively been my career. So that's yeah, doesn't make us any younger, does it? Anyway, I digress. Let's see if I can show this. Yeah, so indeed, we've made quite a lot of efforts on the platform side of things. As you may expect, this is a new release. .NET 8 is already 1 year, was released a year ago. Obviously, that's being supported now. We still support .NET 6 as well, even though, as you may know, it actually ran out of support at Microsoft this week, in fact, but it's still supported as a legacy solution. And we also still support .NET Framework 4.8. With a small caveat is that we expect to deprecate it at some point in the future, but not just yet, because we still have some dependencies which require a framework. But at some point when we can, it will eventually be deprecated and then removed, but we're talking about further in the future, obviously. We target both Windows and Linux, so both are still fully first-class citizens as far as our products are concerned. But we do notice, I mean, when we look at all the projects we've done for the past few years, there's a noticeable shift to Linux, at least on the production side of things, where many customers have been running it on the cloud and on various solutions which are Linux-based. And that's obviously all supported. And that includes container deployments, or as some would say, microservice-ish deployments, which are made based on containers, Docker-style containers, and they can run on Kubernetes or container apps or whatever is possible on your cloud provider of choice, or even on-prem for that matter. And we also deliver our compilers and products as containers as well that you can use for CI/CD integration, whatever pipeline you need to actually recompile your legacy code. But still, that hasn't changed the fact that we are fundamentally not prescriptive about what we do. That means that our tools are very open. So if you want to do it on-prem, you can. If you want to do containers, you can. If you want to do it purely on Windows, you can. Basically, anything is possible in that sense. So yeah, you could say it's agnostic in a sense. And one other big change, we've really tried to make things a lot more simple with this release compared to our previous releases. So basically now we have one single installer for everything. So before we had lots of different installers for lots of different products. But we've tried to make things a lot more simple because there was a lot of code being shared anyway. So now it's one single installer for everything, and you can pick and choose whatever products you want in there, or you can just install everything. And then you just activate the products with a license key. So even if you install everything, it doesn't really matter. You can just use whatever you actually have a license for. On the Linux side of things, we provide 2 Docker images, one for the runtime. So that's really what you need to run whatever you've compiled. And also an SDK, which is effectively an image with the compilers that you could use in a pipeline setting. And this also has the added virtue of having this single version for everything, is that we can now do synchronized deployments over the whole suite. So before we had different divergent versions for our JCL products and our compilers, for example. Now all of this is one single version. Everything is synchronized, that includes the testing as well. They're all tested in a synchronized manner, and that will avoid conflicts between diverging versions, which we've had in the past. So this basically makes it easier for you as a customer and also for us, because it's made a lot of cleanup on our code base. So that's obviously a bonus as well. But then, as Darius mentioned, obviously another big push we've done on this version is everything related to performance. So Darius, I don't know if you want to mention a bit of a performance.
Yeah, let me take this back. Anyone who's ever dealt with mainframe rehosting migration knows that performance is never a simple matter. There's not a single factor. It is a very multi-factor issue. And over time, even though it was not necessarily organized as such, over time, we have looked at virtually every aspect of our product suite in order to improve performance. The obvious one, and the most impressive one, I must say, is that some of our most brilliant colleagues have completely re-implemented the part of our compilers that deals with display numeric and type decimal operations, which are super fast on a real mainframe and that have to be emulated on software. In software, when you're off the mainframe, that emulation has been improved very significantly. On benchmarks, we can get as much as a factor 10, but obviously the performance impact of that improvement will very much depend on how much your application depends on these data types, because otherwise, obviously, that will have no impact. But on a typical COBOL application, you could see easy a factor 2, 3, 4, depending on what you have. Something else which is a little bit marginal, but that matters a lot, is that vSAM and ARM have the capability of producing SQL views on top of binary storage. And as part of that operation, we have to convert data from EBCDIC to ASCII on the fly in very large volumes. And bumping into a number of limitations there, we refactored that code significantly. We gained the factor 10, and I want to take advantage of this opportunity, hoping that we're going to have some of our friends at Microsoft on the call to say, years ago, like 2-3 years ago, we entered a request saying, listen, if we need a new primitive in SQL Server that would allow us to do this without having to code it ourselves. Simple experiments have shown that we can get as much as an additional factor 10, so it is a lot, but we depend on our friends Microsoft willingness to do this. So we have gained a factor 10, and we have another factor 10 to get, hopefully, in the near future. Obviously,
in fact, I think it's also a good opportunity to underline the relationship we had with Microsoft, which has, I mean, we really have a tight relationship, which I think becomes closer and closer as the days go by. But I mean, we have very good contacts with the SQL Server team and others within the company, which really help us and have helped us improve various aspects of performance that we are discussing here.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the relation with Microsoft is paramount to the way we do business nowadays, and we are grateful and we try to be the best possible partners. After those views, there's file I/O. Obviously, most mainframe applications do file I/Os to quite a volume, and if the mainframe is good at anything, it is at reading and writing files very fast. Taking advantage of the fact that we're talking about consolidated box, not a distributed environment. Now we're moving to the cloud. There's going to be distribution. There's going to be network. File I/O has to be worked on. And we have done quite a few things in order to improve the performance, mostly when you do large-scale sequential operation, whether you read or you write, but also optimizations that have to do with how we use the underlying file system, because some of our customers use alternate file systems that produce a similar API, but that have very, very different performance profile for some operation like scanning directories. So we had to optimize it for these kind of cases as well. Something that we've already spoken in other forums is radar, which is, to make a long story short, which is the capability to run a given JCL step, a given batch step, directly on the database server, and thereby getting rid of all the network latencies in the process. And the beauty of radar, I mean, it has a number of interesting properties, but the real beauty of radar is it's how transparent it is. You don't need to change your application. You don't even need to change your JCL. It's a pure configuration thing. And you can say, I want this step of this JCL to run on the database server, and there it goes. That's really the promise of radar, and it has proven a fantastic addition when we're dealing with performance-critical batch workloads. And last but not least, even if it's a different form of performance, we have invested a lot in our Visual Studio plugin. There are a couple of new capabilities like conditional breakpoints that have been implemented. And then we soon realized that Visual Studio was designed for C#, where you enter a scope and you typically have, I don't know, 5 or 10 variables. And now we're entering, let's say, a COBOL scope, and you have hundreds or even thousands of variables, and just the elaboration of all those variables makes for a very uncomfortable user experience. So in order to improve that, the elaboration of these variables has been made asynchronous, so that as a user, from a user experience point of view, it is absolutely instantaneous. So this shows over a number of topics what we did regarding performance. Before we jump to questions, let me just introduce 2 things about the future. One, for us, is a new territory, the idea of having a data-only product. So a product that aims not necessarily at saying, okay, we're going to move your application, but just exposing your legacy mainframe non-relational data as SQL Server views. It's essentially reusing the code, the core technology that was used for VSAM SQL and AMP SQL. And interestingly, it can apply to other systems than mainframes. It can be applied to I systems or to COBOL systems that are running on other platforms than the mainframe. So it is, for us, it's an interesting venture, the idea of having something that deals with data and not with code and application. And the other thing I'm really happy to talk about is that it's a bit geeky. I mentioned, I appreciate that some people are going to say that we are dealing with details, but it's a really cool detail. We have been working on to an integrated debugging experience, and the whole idea is to be able to debug anything within Visual Studio. Within Visual Studio, to be able to run a JCL, put a breakpoint on the JCL, stop at that breakpoint, look at what the status is of your JCL, and then decide, oh, I want to step into, the typical operation you can do within Visual Studio. You step into, and then you step into, say, a COBOL program, and that happens within a single integrated debugging session. Yeah, it's a bit geeky, but anyone who's ever dealt with it can appreciate what this is all about. I promised you 5 slides, so I hope you are not disappointed. We are going to be taking questions. Marcus, did I forget anything of substance?
No, I think we covered it all. Yeah, I was just thinking about this, integrated debugging experience, which I find is just like, to me, it's black magic. I mean, I'm supposed to be a technical guy, but I have no idea how our engineers managed to do that. But that's a good point with being the CTO, is that you don't actually need to be clever. You just need to have clever people working for you.
Yeah, there's something to that. And I mean, talking about myself, I can say some of these things I'm even remote, even further away from these things than you are, and I can only admire the quality of the work, and sometimes I have no idea.
Yeah, but at least you can do nice slides. I can't even do that, so
Don't say that. Alex always complains about my slides.
Okay, we got a first question already from Christian Florio, who's asking if all the features are also supported on SQL Azure PaaS. So not all of our products work on Azure SQL. I mean, the baseline offering, in the sense that we haven't gone into a whole product suite here, but IMSQL and our Kix emulators, which are our solutions for IMS and our full solution for Kix when you have 3270 screens, they require Service Broker to function. And Service Broker requires either a full a full manual installation of SQL Server, or at least a SQL Server managed instance on Azure, to have that as a proposal. And then also Radar, so the performance solution that Darius explained, also requires SQL Server language extension, which is currently only available on a full SQL Server installation. But we hope to see it added to managed instance further down the line. That's pending at Microsoft on their roadmap. As for everything else, everything data related, that will work just fine on Azure SQL. Okay.
But it's a very good question, and we get it all the time. You know, how much of SQL do we need? And obviously, to run say a COBOL DB2 application and deploy it on SQL Server, anything that recognizes SQL, so any incarnation of SQL Server, if you like, will do fine. The more you dig and you need more specific capabilities, then we may need more access. And Microsoft, quite understandably, limits on all the cloud offering limits what you can do. For instance, the language server extension is something that has been earmarked to be made available on SQL MI at some point, but as far as I know, it hasn't happened yet.
And we have another question, and Christian, please feel free to elaborate if you want to ask more detailed questions about it. Obviously, we have an anonymous user asking if we could explain Radar a bit more. Darius, you want to take that?
Oh, I can.
Yeah, I think we have some supplementary information about that.
Yeah, so Radar at the end of the day is a fairly straightforward thing. Okay, let me do this in the local way. Okay, this is not what I had intended. Here we are. So a typical distributed application, you have a JCL running, and that every step is going to connect to SQL Server. And let's say that at some point you analyze your system. You say, well, one of these steps, I think step 2 or step 3 in this example, is just accessing the database too intensively. And the performance problem we're going to have with the execution of step 3 just has to do with the fact, not that it takes so much time to execute, but it has to go to the database an abnormally large number of times. And in a distributed environment, the chattiness of the application is what drives the performance profile. On the mainframe, it doesn't matter because all those two boxes are literally on the same, physical box. So there's no network latency, and you can have excellent performance in most cases. When you're going to talk about the distributed environment, it's going to be kind of different. Interestingly enough, this is also true even for applications that do not access SQL directly, but access vSAM and go through our layer, vSAM SQL, which allows you to map your vSAM file and vSAM accesses directly onto SQL Server. And this is totally transparent, but it can also contribute to the chattiness of the application. And in fact, you would have the very same thing with IMSDB. So it is a pervasive thing. Whenever you access your data on a remote database, the network latency is probably one of the most impactful factors when it comes to performance. So the whole idea about Radar is, in fact, amazingly simple. My step 3, instead of actually executing the programs, is going to instruct the database server to say, please execute step 3. And this step 3 is then going to be executed directly on the database server where all the accesses, it doesn't remove any of these accesses, but these accesses are no longer going over a network. They're happening locally within the database server. And thereby, if you build a benchmark specifically to test for this capability, you can gain a factor 5 or 6. In more realistic setting, you can gain a factor 2 or 3. But what's absolutely fantastic, what I think is absolutely fantastic about this capability is transparency. Namely, the fact that the only thing you need to have is a piece of configuration that says, oh, by the way, step 3 in this JCL needs to go through radar, and there we go. Just to avoid having to explain names again and again, radar stands for Raincode Database Runner. Essentially saying this, the whole point is to be able to run entire steps directly on the database server. I hope this makes sense. Please feel free to come up with follow-up questions.
So obviously there's a bit of, at least I would say, one-shot setup to be done on the database server itself, because we need to install what is effectively an assembly that we provide that basically makes the glue between the SQL Server language extension and our runtime. So that needs to be installed, and then the assemblies in question, so for example, the COBOL programs that need to run need to be compiled, and those assemblies need to be copied there as well. So there's a little bit of setup on the database side, but then after that, it's just smooth sailing.
No, interestingly, the COBOL assemblies, because it can turn into a logistical issue if you have to deploy and copy the COBOL assemblies one by one on the database server. The database server must have an access to these assemblies, but they don't have to be on the same machine.
Yeah.
So it is a security setup. Obviously, it's something that has to be discussed with the DBAs, because there are quite a few implications out there. But we have been able to demonstrate that this can be deployed in a reasonably flexible way.
Yeah. We've got a follow-up question from Christian Florio. So he's asking if connections to managed identity on SQL Server are supported. Well, effectively, what our products use is very simply the .NET SQL Server connector. That's what they rely on, which means that effectively the kind of token we use for authentication is simply the connection string. So as far as I know, but I would need to confirm that maybe with our engineers, you can use managed identity that way. I believe that you can use, you can set up the connection string to use SSPI and other things. I haven't done that myself, to be perfectly honest. So I would assume that it wouldn't cause a problem, but that's something I would need to check with the engineers. But basically anything that you can do with the .NET connector, the standard .NET SQL Server connector should work. And I believe managed identity is part of that, at least on Windows. We have a question about AI as well.
Oh, yeah.
Darius, I know you love the subject, Darius. I'll leave that one to you.
That's not very cool, I must say, Marcus. That's not very cool. No, so in many ways, what we do, the core of what we do is not based on AI, and bluntly said, should not. In the sense that the core of what we do is a mechanical process that guarantees the full, absolute 100% preservation of the behavior of the system as it was running on the mainframe. So it's not a place where you can say, well, we're going to have something based on machine learning or on large language models or whatnot to reproduce the behavior, and it's going to be fine in so many percent of the cases, even if the so many is 99 point something. This is just not what we do. That would be pointless. So in other words, when I talk about AI in our context, I say, well, we don't have AI as our core. Our core is must absolutely be deterministic, and therefore cannot depend on something as non-deterministic as AI. No matter how good it is absolutely fantastic. There is always a room for error. And we just cannot have that. So we do it purely mechanically. This does not mean that there is no room for AI in whatever we do. The most obvious one, but you should, I'm going to refer to our friends of Microsoft for that, is the absolute fantastic integration of Copilot in Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code to allow you to maintain your COBOL code. It is absolutely flabbergasting how effective and how smooth the experience can be there. So that's something you get just of getting off the mainframe and on the Microsoft platform, is that you can take advantage of whatever is there. And then one of my most beloved colleagues has been working on another initiative. And I'm not going to elaborate too much on this because it's a long and complex story, but I think it's pretty cool. He has, sorry, I say he because it's a he, right? He has been using AI to perform clustering across a system. The idea at the end of the day is fairly simple. You give us 20,000 COBOL programs, and we have no idea of what's what. Using these clustering techniques, this colleague of mine has been able to produce charts like this one, where essentially the 20,000 programs are divided in clusters. And essentially you can say, well, out of those 20,000, those 7,000 are similar in terms of what they do, similar in terms of the files they access, similar in terms of the other programs they call, similar in terms of the CICS statements they contain, and so on and so forth. And by doing this, we have an ability even on very large portfolio to get an idea of what is out there in terms of how to qualify this portfolio and decide what should be best done about it. And for instance, recognize that some clusters are easy to rehost and some others are not. So this is one of the areas where we have used AI. But obviously it is at the fringe. So this is something we typically use during assessments and the very early phases when we deal with the portfolio we've never seen before, and we try to get some wisdom out of it and getting an idea of what is what. The other example I mentioned based on Copilot is something that happens post hoc after the migration project. The migration project itself, the compilation project itself, the rehosting project itself does not include AI. I hope this answers the question. Again, any follow-up?
Actually, that brings, there's a question we get, when we touch base with a few prospects every now and then, we get the question of, okay, but why should I, why should I use a Raincode product instead of just using AI to do my migration? That's a question that does appear every now and then. And yeah, how do you reply to those guys? Because that's not always, I mean, you got to understand where they're coming from.
I understand where it's coming from. I understand the hype. I'm not naive. So in essence, when we say we're going to use AI, pragmatically speaking, what does that entail? That essentially says, well, I'm going to ask some AI machinery to take my COBOL code and to convert it to Java code at large scale, and then I'll be out of COBOL and I'll be able to hire Java developers off the street, and they will be able to further maintain my system, and life is going to be sweet. There are like a gazillion technical objections against this, and let's not get into this. My biggest objection, to be honest with you, is the one of responsibility. As I said, our friends at Microsoft have absolutely fantastic engineers, and their AI capabilities are unmatched. They have even better lawyers, in the sense that if you use that thing to perform translation, they will make sure that the responsibility for any flaw lies with you. In other words, you're on your own. You have, say, a 10 million lines COBOL code, you convert it automatically, say, to a 15 million lines Java system, you are pretty much on your own to ensure that that system does indeed what the original one did. And I think, I'm not saying it never will be possible, but as of right now, it's still very much science fiction, at least in my opinion.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Christian, we got another question from you. And by the way, we already got a reply from one of our engineers who confirms that managed identity is already in use at one of our customers. So there you go. That actually confirms that that's a possibility should you need it. And Christian is asking us when the Crossbow release will be available. Well, in fact, it's being made available as we speak. So in practice, so you may have heard of Raincode 360, which is our fully deployable demo environment on Azure. We're currently putting the finishing touches to that release on Raincode 360, so it should be available sometime next week. I think by Wednesday or Thursday, I think is the estimate. It has to go through the vetting process of Azure to go through, so it takes a little while. But basically, if a customer reaches out to us now, it's available. So anyone who wishes to upgrade today, they may well do so. So it's available effectively.
I'm happy because this is typically a question for you. There's another question that says mandatory upgrade, or can we stick to 4.2?
Okay, yeah, that's obviously a good question. So what's going to happen now is that Crossbow, which is technically version 5, so it's the next major version, is going to become the main line. So that's going to be the product that we're selling. It's going to be starting from now. Which means that customers who currently are on 4.2 or even previous versions, I mean, are still supported as part of our maintenance contract. What we intend to do is at some point effectively deprecate 4.2 and say, okay, we need to move ahead to 5.0. But what's going to happen is that we're going to give notice of roughly, I think we plan a notice of 18 months to those customers. So they get to go ahead like, okay, you have 18 months to prepare for that upgrade. So we're not going to come, gun against the head and say, okay, you need to migrate tomorrow. That's obviously not how we work. So yeah, the idea is that at some point in the future, we're going to give notice of about 18 months to our existing customer base to do that upgrade.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
That's been an interesting format in any case.
Yeah. I have to say that I'm a bit relieved. I kind of feared that people will start crucifying us with absolutely insane questions we have absolutely no way of being able to answer. I feel back to my
just hold on.
days.
We may still get surprises. We don't know. Still open. Obviously, if you have any questions, go ahead. And even if they are tangentially related or okay, if they go about quantum physics, I'm afraid I can't really help, but
Okay.
Let's see, I think we have something. That's a weirdly formulated question. I think it's a question about ZBridge.
Yeah. I wouldn't do that normally, but I have to beg whoever posted this to please clarify the question.
Yeah, not really a question.
So there's a question about licensing policy for server and per developer. So this it's not really the forum. B, we're just not the people to talk about this. I mean, this is for way more serious people than Marcus and myself.
People who actually handle money.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, we have a price for the runtime, and we have a price per developer. It's not per server, it's per core. Please feel free to engage with our sales team, and they will give you all the information you need as per how the licensing policy works. The timeline, ZBridge, the timeline. So I expect at this point ZBridge to be made available in April, May. That is pretty much my current timeline. The core technology is there, so that part is reasonably easy, but we have to turn it into a packaged product, and that raises that raises a challenge of its own. Okay. Listen, thank you all. This was an interesting format, unusual, I must say. Unusual for us, for sure. Thank you for attending. I think the recording will be made available to all attendees. And well, would you have any other question? You know where to find us. Okay,
Yeah.
have a great day.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Take care, bye-bye.